and welcome to the Ride a String podcast. I'm Kevin Sluter.
And I'm Matt Moreno.
And we are bringing you a show about orchestra teachers,
for orchestra teachers,
and those aspiring to be orchestra teachers. As summer comes to a close, many of us are starting to plan and map out our brand new school year. How we set up our day-to-day teaching environment can greatly affect our outcomes of success. Rebecca Farrar, a director from Plano, Texas, sits down with us to discuss the various ways in which she organizes her orchestra program to maximize student focus and learning.
I grew up in Carrollton, Texas, which is one of the Dallas area suburbs, and I got to go through the whole school system from kindergarten through 12th grade in the same feeder pattern from elementary to middle to high school. In that school district at the time, orchestra started in elementary school in the 5th grade, and band started in the elementary school in the 6th grade. I originally joined orchestra to get out of the generic specials electives of elementary school, wanting to quit orchestra and play the flute and band the very next year.
Really?
Really?
I did not. How did I not know this about you? All right, anyway.
Throughout my 5th grade year, I actually ended up falling in love with the cello, and I scrapped my plans to quit orchestra and play flute and band the next year. Might have had something to do with our dear family friend and now my stepmother, Charlotte Mollering, who's been interviewed on the podcast before.
And then your high school director was?
For 2 years, Melina Wilkins, who is now Melina Schaefer, who teaches in Arlington now. And for the next 2 years, Julie Blackstock, who still teaches in our area.
Okay. You got Julie, I guess, right as she entered?
I think that was her first year as a head director. She had been at another high school in the district as an assistant before that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And so where all have you taught?
I have taught all in Plano ISD. For my first 2 years of teaching, I was the assistant at Haggard Middle School, and I learned everything I know from the first head director I worked with, Sue Ewing, who is a master teacher and amazing mentor. And in my 3rd year of teaching, I moved to my current placement, which is Bowman Middle School, also in Plano.
Okay. Where'd you go? What'd you do for college?
For college, I actually, for my undergrad, went to a not particularly musical school. I went to Austin College in Sherman. I got an amazing general education there. I loved it, and I wouldn't change it for anything. But it wasn't super musical focused because it was such a small school. So then I went on to Texas Tech and got my master's in music ed and my teaching certificate simultaneously, and also loved my experience out there. And that's kind of how I got inserted into Plano as my student teaching placement through Texas Tech. I was with Sue Ewing, who I already mentioned, and with Brian Coatney, who is at the senior high in the same feeder system at the time.
And you actually long-term subbed at Jasper for a semester? Is that right?
I did. That was when Jasper and Plano West split the assistant, and I was maternity leave substitute in there. So I've actually, in some capacity, worked in all 3 cluster systems in our district.
Nice.
So there's a lot of stuff to talk about today. I feel like a good place to start with this particular topic is how you describe kind of your basic teaching philosophy, your like core operating procedure, as it were.
Okay. I subscribe to Deweyism light. I remember really being taken by John Dewey when I was in my college classes. So this is all a super paraphrase and not as onto it as if I were still actively doing my studies, but his main deals were like education is for everyone, and everyone deserves a strong and solid education no matter who you are. So that speaks very deeply to me. So that's kind of like the purpose of education, is to be a successful and good, well-aware human being. And I think that's true no matter what you teach. And in terms of classroom approach, he kind of balanced between being really strong on your curriculum knowledge, which is important, but if you only focus on curriculum knowledge, you end up with little robot children. And a balance between child-centered learning, which is really important to have children at the core of their education, but if you only have child-centered stuff, then you end up with a lot of distraction and not enough like getting down to business. So he kind of found an in-between of that is what I really That's kind of how I operate, really.
So at the expense of it kind of sounded like a job interview that we deal with, what is your approach to classroom management?
This is my favorite thing to talk about. I like to say you cannot control the behavior of children, but you can absolutely control the environment in which they make their decisions. And nearly everything that I do in my classroom for teaching delivery, systems setup, procedures, all of that is designed to give the kids a good structure where they can independently choose to do the right thing, to where they are the driver of their behavior, and I'm a facilitator more than an enforcer.
How does that look in your class? Maybe an example or two.
Okay. I think it's important that the kids have practice following easy directives and making easy behavior choices, so that when it's time to make a difficult decision or have to have a hard no on something, they are equipped to deal with it better. For example, we always set down our instruments and equipment in the same location in the same order every time, because that's an easy direction to follow, and it primes them to be a good rehearsal member and to listen and be aware of their surroundings. So all the instruments go on the left of your chair. All of your school binders and purses go directly underneath your chair. All of your bows go with your frog on your side, and then all of your pencils go on your music stand. And that's just how you get class set up every single day, so that they have practice following routines and meeting procedural expectations.
That structure and routine is just vital. I mean, if anything deviates, like the kids see it and they take full advantage of it.
Absolutely. I try really hard not to let my kids take advantage of me. And that was kind of a survivalist mode as a young teacher several years ago. I did feel very, for people who don't know me very well, I'm fairly small in stature, and I've kind of looked younger than my years until recently, which is, I think, a blessing in disguise. So I did feel really vulnerable as a young teacher and not being taken seriously. So this kind of helped make sure that I was taken seriously by the kids and by parents and other teachers around me. So that was very helpful. And then a side benefit is, this actually helps me run my classroom really well.
Yeah.
And this kind of structure and routine is also so important. You get so many kids, especially as a middle school teacher, whose IEPs say that they need structure or advance notice. And it's really good, especially for your children with autism, to help them feel successful in your classroom. Mm-hmm. And it's just a general procedure that you have already had. You're not having to change anything to meet these children's accommodation needs.
So I'm curious, with just we're nearing the end of July. What are your priorities for getting the year started? Just with all logistics, dealing with the handbook, taping instruments. Where would you prioritize has to be done first in order for day one to go as smoothly as it can?
Well, this particular summer is different. We completely moved out of our building, not just the orchestra, the entire campus moved out of our building for a top to bottom renovation. So this summer is just, I'm going to have my handbooks ready, and I'm going to have some practice bows ready, because we're not sure if the classroom will be ready. If this were any other year, though, my priorities would be having the handbook printed out and edited top to bottom and checked in any changes with my principal, because that's basically what day one is going to be, is going over our handbook and stuff. Second priority is the physical space. Is it ready for children, and is it going to be the same way that they're going to see every day? So I would have the instruments. You kind of mentioned instruments being taped. That's got to happen before the kids are using them, or it's going to be a disaster, because they're going to be all over the place. So instruments would be taped. I use gaff tape on my floors to put a little mark where each of the chairs go, so that I can maintain the space in the room and the setup of the room. I teach the beginners in rows instead of orchestra arc, so I've got 2 different colors of tape on the floor: bright yellow for beginner setup and dark blue, which are my school colors, for the orchestra arc setup. And that way the kids, and this is kind of controlling the environment so the kids can make the right decisions. the kids will move the chairs and put them in these little X's. And I have kind of pre-measured them for, can I squeeze through between and get hands on every kid? Is there enough room for your case in that space? So all of the tape on the floor has already been pre-tested to make sure that it's the best setup for me to get around and work with the kids.
So can you tell us about seating arrangements, just where you place kids across all sections?
Yeah, so for our violins, I separate them in a first and second violin, not by ability at all. At the start of the year, for our intermediates and advanced, I'll actually go through and make sure that I've got a leader on first violin and a leader on second violin. Then I'll get my second best leader and my second best leader so that the first and second violins are equally divided. And then after every concert, I will swap out about half of them back and forth. And I'll keep a record of who's been where so that every kid, every school year, plays first and second violin. As a cellist, I was never part of the first and second violin dichotomy as a kid. But I feel like there's always this thing of, oh, second violins, you're not as good, you're not a very good player. And I try my best to make sure that they don't have that kind of feeling in my orchestra. A first violin part is very different from a second violin part as you get into upper level literature, but the way that we think about the kids who play those shouldn't be any different. Even with my beginners, we won't even call them first and second violins yet. We'll just say inside violins and outside violins. Now, of course, when you actually start playing music that says second violin at the top, we say, oh, look, this is just what they call it because you appear second on the score. That's just what we call the inside violins now. For day-to-day seating in the class, I'll kind of, at the beginning of the year, I'll try to make sure that all of my strongest kids are sitting near the weakest kids so that there's a leader and a follower. Kids learn so much from sitting next to each other. And from then on, I will rotate them by one seat. That will do a circle around their section so that every Monday they're sitting in a new place by a new kid. But the rotation is always predictable. So I actually have Post-it notes with their names on it, and I'll just actually rearrange all the Post-it notes every Monday. And the kids just know, oh, it's Monday. I'm going to go check the podium before I get my seat. And after a couple of months, they don't even really need to check because they already know where they're headed next.
Yeah.
So it introduces the idea of different kids are sitting next to different people. Everyone's going to be at the front at some point. Everyone's going to be at the back at some point. So you get that kind of mixture without it being an, oh no, where do I sit? It's never a huge surprise when it does change for them. So for those kids who thrive on structure, they're able to have that mixed up seating without it being difficult for them to handle because even though it is different this week, they know how it's going to be different before they arrive. Now, with the beginners, I don't rotate them until they start sitting in the normal orchestra arc seating, which is around Thanksgiving time. They will sit in the same place every day because really, if you think about it, even though they've been going to school all the way up to this point, our kind of classroom is so very different from anything they've experienced. And even the kids who don't need the structure really thrive on it, even if you don't need it as much as someone else does. Because just every little thing they're learning, physically, reading music on the page, the kind of silence that you need in between music is not a thing that they have in their other classrooms. So I don't want to add another thing on top of that they're already dealing with so much new stuff. But yeah, so around Thanksgiving, the beginners will sit in, quote, regular seating, and then they'll start doing the rotations as well, because they've got it down by then. They know what orchestra class looks like by Thanksgiving. Ooh, I do want to speak about getting my concert program ready. I think it is so important as a middle school teacher, and perhaps as high school as well, that I make a master copy of the music that I have played through for fingerings and bowings and markings and marked it up before I give it to the kids. That is such a time saver in rehearsal. Like if I know that we need to go to third position in this measure, I'm going to put it in there before the kids ever get it in their hands.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another way that you can kind of control the environment and the kids get to figure it out. I'm not having to say, all right, now put the pencil on the paper and spend all these 10 minutes of helping the kids write it in. They just see it, and then you'll see them experimenting with it before you even talk to them out loud about it, which is great. If it's a new piece of music I haven't taught before, I will go through on all 4 instruments and play through all the way each part. I think it's really important to figure out where in the bow do I need to be in this measure, because sometimes when you're just visually looking down the page, sure, you're going to catch all the 4th fingers you want to mark, you're going to catch some of the shifting that you're going to want, and lots of the bowings at the middle school level, you're going to be able to catch what you want without playing through it. But some of these very specific, oh God, we got to be at the tip right here. Oh no, you have to be absolutely at your frog. You need to mark that ahead of time to give the kids the heads up of that's coming.
Yeah, and you said you play through all the instruments?
On new pieces that I haven't taught before, I do.
Yeah, that's cool. I try to do that as much as I can. Even then, sometimes I just, because playing through it, it does teach you the technical difficulties or challenges you can come across and everything, and then learning, this should really be played in this position or this one. But then sometimes it also tells you how engaging the part is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You kind of like read my mind on that part, yeah.
Yeah, so sometimes I get reminded I have to do it more often, because one time we had a clinician out with one of my groups, and I just went and grabbed a bass, and y'all know I'm a bass player, like I should know these things already. But I went and sat with the bass section, and we didn't get spoken to for like 15 minutes. And we didn't even get asked to play but maybe once within those 15 minutes. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I asked the kids, I was like, is it like this every day when I'm up there?
They're like, yeah.
And they're like, yeah. I was like, oh, I am so sorry. And like, I just, it's just one of those things. Like if I had played through it a little bit more, I would have known that, I don't know, I guess I would have caught that, oh yeah, it's going to be leaving the basses out quite a bit. And so from then on, I was like, guys, anytime you feel ignored, just pack up and go to a practice room.
Oh my!
I just said, just go. Like, I know you guys can find better things to work on if you see that I'm having to work with the second violins, so exclusively. Like, I trust you guys are going to go find something better to improve whatever it is than just sitting there.
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of on a music marking streak right now. Can I tell y'all more about what I like to mark in my stuff before I give it to the kids?
Absolutely.
So many of the difficulties I think that kids have when they're learning new music can stem from visual confusion on the page. For example, even in the symphony orchestra that I play in sometimes, if there is a rest on beat 1, at the start of a new line of music, I'm going to fall into it. And if I am going to fall into that rest on beat 1 on the start of a new line, I know my 7th graders are. So just in the margin of the previous line, I'll just put a little rest in parentheses so they see it coming. That's one of the things I mark all the time. When you have a DS and the sign is not super visible, way down at the bottom where it says DS, I'll say to measure 12. Mm-hmm. And then they know exactly where to go. Just bracketing on the repeat signs, as much of the kinds of stuff that I know we're going to mark in anyways, I put in. I don't put fingerings on every single note because I want kids to be line and spaces fluent. I will mark in fingerings if it's shifting and it's a new concept to that age level. I'll put in high 2 versus low 2 if it's a new concept for that age level. If they're my older kids, I'll start just putting the sharps and naturals and stuff instead of high 2 and low 2. Yeah. Just as much as I can to save time and explanation and rehearsal. Because if it's something that they already know how to do, I don't need to spend my time telling them how to read it on the page. Okay. I'd rather spend my time teaching them something new.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And so on the overview of concerts, how many do you schedule throughout the year? And do you combine your beginners with your 7th and 8th graders?
General concert schedule of the year. The first one we'll have is after about 6 weeks of instruction, we'll do the beginner demonstration concert. And that's basically just showing the parents what the beginners have been doing in class. We'll play our lines from the book. We'll show them our exercises that we do. I will explain to the parents how you take care of instruments at home, because the beginners have not taken their instruments home at this point. I only want them, until that point when they've gotten strong enough and practiced enough, I only want them to touch their instruments under my supervision to kind of prevent those sneaky bad habits that come in when kids are by themselves at the beginning. And then our feeder senior high will come over and show us what they're working on as kind of a preview of, oh my goodness, look at how cool these kids are. And they've been in the same school system that you've been in. Look where you could be in high school. And that's the first concert we'll do after about 6 weeks. In early October, we'll do the general fall concert, which is just our intermediate and advanced orchestras because the beginners had just done their demonstration. In December, we usually do a cluster concert, which is all of the middle school orchestras. Well, I guess in our case, both of the middle school orchestras, both of our 9-10 high schools and our senior high school, all together taking turns on their pieces. So that's everyone. Then the next concert we'll have is the UIL competition, which I guess is in early March, and we'll spend most of our early spring semester getting ready for that. The beginners, it's usually around the same week, perform on open house, and we do that jointly with the beginning choir and the beginning band at open house. So they've got a concert in there too. And then we'll close out the year in May-ish with all of my levels together, the beginners, the intermediates, and the advanced.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of beginners, I didn't know this when I first started teaching, but there's actually quite a bit of debate out there about how to best set them up in the public school classroom. One of the big topics comes up is like the homogeneous versus heterogeneous. For my first several years of teaching, I'd only ever really known or prescribed the idea of we have a set of violin viola classes, we have a set of cello bass classes. The thought being that you focus on just the shoulder instruments and just the other instruments would allow you to specialize your teaching and get their specific needs right when they're beginning. So when you and I met, you kind of opened my eyes to the concept of teaching all the instruments together as beginners. Can you talk to us a little bit about why you teach them all together?
This is another one of my favorite topics to talk about. So when I was a young teacher at the very beginning of my career, I had only ever had experience doing mixed instruments because that's how it was in my student teaching and in my first 2 years as the assistant director. So my first experience teaching homogeneous classes was actually when I became a head director on my own, and I inherited the system that was there from the previous director. So that year I had a class of 20 violins in the morning, and then I had a class of 10 viola, cello, bass in the afternoon. It was a small year for beginners that year. So I kind of got to teach the viola, cello, bass class felt really familiar because it was essentially a fully mixed class. And then the violin class was very different from anything I'd ever taught. And that's when I really started to think more deeply about why I prefer mixed instruments over the single instruments. I think the number one reason is ensemble skills. From the very beginning, your kiddos in your mixed instrument classes are going to be hearing more harmonies when they're playing. When you start rehearsing concert music instead of just method book exercises, they're going to be hearing each other's part from the very beginning. And I didn't realize how valuable that was until I didn't have it anymore. And the violin class always struggled when we combined together on not being distracted by the other parts when they joined in. And the viola, cello, bass class was already so used to it. So I think that's the number one reason is ensemble skills. Other reasons I like it, it makes it easy on your counselors for scheduling. In my school district, orchestra is a dedicated class period of the school day. It's not a pull-out or a before or after school. It's an actual period, just like math or reading would be. And you'll get those kids who have standardized test remediation class, who have their designated dyslexia class, and their schedules get really locked in when they have those necessary bonus electives. And if that's the case, and you've got 3 or 4 different periods of beginning orchestra, they can only maybe go into one of them because of their other classes that lock them in. And what if that's the violin class and they absolutely want to be a bass player? Am I going to tell this kid, well, I'm so sorry, you're going to play the violin now or you're going to quit my class? No. If you have mixed instruments in all of them, of course you need to work with your counselors to make sure you can maintain basic balance, but it allows kids like that some flexibility in your schedule, so they can still have what they want out of your class. For my personal teaching, another reason I like mixed instruments is error detection. Something most people don't know about me is I actually have some hearing loss, as many professional musicians do. I am still able to hear qualities of sounds and pitches and stuff, but if there's any sort of background noise going on, it's really hard for me to tell what I'm listening to. So if I'm listening to a class of 20 violins and I think I might hear something wrong over there, I don't know who it's coming from. In a class of 20, I'm like, I've got a 1 in 20 chance of figuring out who played that out of tune F sharp. Who is it? In the mixed instrument class, if you've got the same number of kids but equally divided amongst all your instruments and you hear a cello F sharp, well, it's one of you 4 guys over there. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go help you over there. So it's just so much easier for me to hear what's going on, because as anyone who's taught beginners know, you're on the ground, you're underneath this kid's elbow, your back is turned over there because you're looking over here, you're all over the place, and you need to be able to hear as best you can to help out the entire classroom and single kids all at the same time.
Yeah, and is your counselor, or are your counselors pretty flexible to allow you to move kids if needed, so that you're avoiding just one cello in this class or one viola?
The counselors at my school are really wonderful about, they will have all the music teachers submit our class lists of placements of who belongs in which class. And unless it is those kinds of kids I mentioned earlier who are really strict and, well, they need this class that's only 1 period, mm-hmm. They need this class which is only 1 period, they'll do a pretty good job of only moving those kids who are necessary and kind of helping us to protect our balance, like we said. So it doesn't get wild with instrumentation.
So I know one of my things that always sounded scary about having them mixed together is just I guess I would call it the multitasking nature of, the bass player needs something very different than the violist. I mean, not very, it's all music, but how do you... I'm
going to interrupt you because you just reminded me of my other main reason why I think it is totally normal and okay to teach mixed instruments in one classroom. Some people will say, oh, well, the bass is so very different from the violin, and it is. But the sound production mechanism is the same on all of our instruments in the string orchestra. It is all bow speed, bow placement, bow weight, left hand posture. That's true for all of our instruments. Now in the band world, the sound production mechanism is inherently different on a woodwind than it is for brass. So they really need to be taught separately. But the string instruments, like the violin is going to need some more bow speed. The bass is not going to need some more bow speed. But the concept is the same. And you can talk to the kids about that and engage, oh, violins, tone's not very good. Give us some more bow speed up there on the E string. Bass is not you. And then you keep going. And it doesn't take any time out of your instruction to include them in that way. And it helps them develop a little bit of curiosity about each other and how they're all the same, but different also. And same thing for fingerings. All right, F sharp over here, high 2, 3, 4. There you go. It took me just as long to give the instruction to all my instruments as it would have to one. And once again, for those kids who are really engaged in orchestra and probably thinking a little more about it than maybe some others, like the kind of kid I was when I was growing up, they start translating, oh, the violins are playing third finger, that's my fourth finger G on the cello. And it helps get their brains engaged even when they're not playing, I think, when you're in the mixed instrument class.
Well, I know you said sorry that you had to interrupt me, which you pretty much answered my question right there.
Ooh, and when you're doing written work, of course we all read in different clefs, but if you're taking the time to do written work and help a kid place on the right lines and stuff, that's already a time-intensive part of your day. And just to get all the treble clef kids checked off by you is going to take just as much time as if you checked off 10 treble clefers, 5 alto clefers, and 5 bass clefers. So it all works out the same.
So that's how you handle beginners. How do you set up your 7th and 8th graders?
I actually don't hold auditions for our 7th graders, who are usually our second year players, the intermediates. Instead, I will take them and divide them equally by ability and have 2 or 3 class periods of intermediate orchestra. And in my mind, that kind of works like beginner plus, where we continue to work on our foundational skills. I feel like those second year players are still young enough that the ones who are really, really strong and maybe could play in the varsity this year, they are still early enough in their playing and socially young enough with their peers to not feel held back by the kiddos who aren't as strong. And especially for the kids who are not as strong yet on their instruments. In my classes where just by accident we've gotten a bunch of those kinds of kids all at once, they have no leaders to emulate or no leaders to follow. And you'll just end up with a bunch of kids who are frustrated and lost and difficult behaviorally because they feel lost and stressed out. And to just keep them together for one more year helps those kids who didn't quite make it all the way through beginners, but they're ready for intermediates. It helps boost them up with another year amongst all of their peers. And the leaders really get to develop some good leadership skills as section leaders in that level. So our 2 or 3 different periods of intermediates, we will combine on the concerts to play one program together. I also like to do it this way because it's difficult to have in your middle school varsity orchestra kids who have been playing for 3 years and have already developed a vibrato and are already shift fluent and already know all of their highs and lows or extensions, to start the school year off with someone who's just starting their very second year of playing and doesn't have those same skills. And I think you end up with a slowdown where you're having to reteach those skills amongst the kids who already have them. And I'd rather develop that vibrato in 7th grade, get them ready for shifting, get all of their highs and lows before I really separate them out into varsity and non-varsity. It works really, really well in my school. It's difficult though, because in our district we have an open transfer policy. And also as a Title I school, we often have kids moving in and out with regularity. So sometimes it's difficult when a child of mine transfers somewhere else and they are, quote, behind on some of their technique skills, even though they've been learning wonderful ensemble, wonderful rehearsal strategies. Sometimes they end up in the backs of the orchestras and the backs of their sections in other schools just because our system is so different. Or vice versa, I will inherit a new child who perhaps knows a lot more of these physical techniques on their instrument but hasn't had the same rehearsal practice, ability to follow routines, critical thinking about where to be in the bow and stuff. And sometimes they feel uncomfortable in my group because I say, well, we're not ready to do that yet. And they've kind of explored some of it, but not in the way that works for our structure. So that is kind of the payoff of how I do things.
So what happens when they leave 7th grade?
When they leave 7th grade, we do hold auditions at that point. And we will separate into what I call chamber orchestra, which is the auditioned varsity, and advanced orchestra, which functions basically as orchestra year 3. So everyone who finished that intermediate group will be promoted to advanced or orchestra year 3, no matter what. And then those who wish to audition will be placed in the chamber orchestra. I will use the same technique book with both groups, and they will combine together on most concerts, the chamber and the advanced, so that the advanced kids are still learning those techniques that they need to be ready for high school. I think one of our most important jobs as middle school teachers is getting them ready to learn more stuff when they get to high school. But then so that the chamber orchestra, the varsity kids, also receive a more appropriate challenge, they will perform 1 or 2 pieces just by themselves at these concerts as well. And they will do a couple of bonus concerts, like we don't call it recruitment in our district, but for people who aren't in our district, that will be the most familiar term. The elementary demonstrations, where you kind of show off your program to the incoming beginners. Chamber only will do that one because it's some extra stuff. Or at holiday time, chamber will learn a whole book full of holiday tunes. It's usually about a dozen plus that we learn in 2 weeks to put on for the school, and that's another one of those chamber only extra challenges. So essentially I structure my program with beginners or orchestra 1, intermediates orchestra 2, advanced or orchestra 3, and then chamber is orchestra 3 plus some extra.
When I imagine that bypasses a lot of the drama, thinking the size of your program, you would have at least 3, maybe even 4 performing groups if you just straight ranked and had orchestras.
Oh, and I don't want to have to program and rehearse for that many kiddos, because up until this past year, I was all by myself, and that's too much to handle. And now we do have a second orchestra director position at our school, but they're also split with another one, so it's unfair of me to put too much on both of us together. So yeah, just practically, I don't want to program and teach that many levels of orchestra. Matt's smiling at me because he does have to do that.
Yes, I do.
Well, because by the time they make it to high school, that kind of forced grade level in the same place is no longer appropriate. Those kids at the top and the bottom have separated too far.
Yes.
Like in 7th grade, you've got those kids who are at the top and the bottom, but I guess you can't see my hands on the podcast. They're close together when you're in 7th grade, the top and the bottom, but as you get older, they separate too far for that to be appropriate anymore.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So how about your grading system throughout the year with daily grades, major grades, all that?
Y'all keep asking me about my favorite things.
Got a lot of them.
Maybe that's why I'm here today. So at the core, it's kind of district policy that middle schools, you've got your major grades, which are worth 75% of your grade, and you've got your daily grades, which are worth 25% of your final average. Most of the grades I take are dailies, and in beginners and in intermediates, you'll have 2 daily grades a week. One is your practice card. Yes, I know they're super controversial, but to have one sends the message that at-home practice is important. If I were to take it away, I wouldn't have that same way to send the message. Kind of what I was talking about before, like having kids practice easy expectations. Practice cards are one of those. Mm-hmm. Yes, I know you're not practicing all of the ones that you turn in, but it still sends the message that it's important to me. And I think that's more important than whether little Johnny practiced all however many minutes this week. So beginners and intermediates will have one of those a week. And all grade levels will have their in-class preparation grade. I have a sheet that I made in Excel, and this is another thing I stole from my first year teaching. And since they're 5 days in a school week, we get 20 points a day, adds up to 100 for the week. And I can mark down, like if we do a theory worksheet that day, I could make it worth all 20 points of the day, and I'll grade it. And if they got everything, I'll just put a check in their column for that day. If you missed 8 points, I'll put -8. If you missed the whole thing, I'll put -20. And I think it's important to do written work, especially at the middle school level, because it gives you another insight to what the kids understand or not. This is one of the topics we'll have to go further in later, is like figuring out where the problem is, which is my other favorite thing to talk about, but we'll keep it on daily grades for now. So I try to keep written theory in our life. And it's also good because if a kid is really not understanding it, that 20 points out of their full week is not going to tank their grade. So it's going to be the signal to you as a teacher of, oh, I need to remediate this concept in class, or maybe I need to ask little Johnny to come in for tutorials this week to fix it. And it's not going to ruin his grade in the process. Now, if he keeps having problems every single day for a -20, then yeah, it might hurt his grade, but the kiddos' grades are protected to a point when you break it down to those 20 points a day. I can also put in, like if I'm up there conducting and we're just all in the wrong part of our bow. Like, oh, come on, y'all. We know that we need to be at the tip to start this up bow whole note. I am going to get in the daily grade book and see who's not at their tips. And we'll just play through it maybe 3 or 4 times, and I'll put it here and say, Kevin, you only made it to the middle, -2. Matt, you were at your frog. That's the wrong way you're supposed to be, dude. So it's I try to let the kids see me using it, and it's not so much a fear tactic of hey. It's just I can show myself, and if my admin ever needs to know what's going on with the kid, I can pull out these notes that specifically say, well, yeah, you only have an 80 in orchestra this week because we really worked on getting to our tip and you didn't, or you kept playing F sharp when it was supposed to be natural, and I can just write all of that kind of stuff down each day. I'm also able to put, like, if you keep interrupting me and talking when you're not supposed to, the way that our standards are worded about learning how to perform in groups, I can say, you're talking in rehearsal. You're not losing your points because you talked out of turn. You're losing your points because that's not how rehearsal strategy works. So you can mark that down every once in a while if you need to also. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've always liked the idea that daily grade can at least partially reflect. It's not about like not talking or not plucking while I'm talking. It's about, this is not how we rehearse. It's about teaching you how to have a good rehearsal.
Everything that I marked down in the Grayley Day book is curricular in nature. This is not where I do my behaviors. Now, I will have Post-it notes where if I say, all right, Kevin, that's your second time with gum in my class this week. Next time you have gum in your mouth, I'm giving you a detention. Post-it note with Kevin's name on it right on the page for his class, so I see it again. It's for me, it's super important that if I give a kid a boundary like that, I absolutely follow through on it exactly when they expect to. Because if you say, all right, detention next time, and then he has gum and there's not a detention, my words and suggestions are much less meaningful to the kids, and they're less likely to take me seriously, kind of going back to that idea we had before.
So I'm really curious to know, in class, you have your score, you have your baton. What else do you have with you at the podium?
Oh, man. Middle school confessions here, I very rarely use the baton up until the last bit before the concert. Sure. So my setup is, I've got like the big winger podium, and I've got my scores in it. And for me, my scores are a big black binder with Xeroxes on it, so I can mark the crud out of them. Ooh, this is another thing I like. If we do mark something down together in class, I mark it exactly in my score the way the kids have it. So I can say, oh, measure 30, we added a bow lift there, or we decided we didn't like that shift, and all the kids will say, yes, they have that in their part. Mm-hmm. So that's up there. Then to my left, I have a little rolling cart. I don't like the big one because I'm too small and I can't look over it. So I have a little rolling cart that has the McAdams, which I don't really use anymore because I use my iPad on Bluetooth for my metronome. I find that I'm able to run that on a lower volume and have more people hear it when it comes over the big classroom speakers. But I use the McAdams for tuning at the beginning of class. Then I've got a cup full of pencils, which I allow the kids to borrow in exchange for daily points. And they can even keep them if they want, all the better, so you have it next time. Then I have a cup of pens and highlighters in different places because my whole setup is about minimizing distraction time. So if it's in the same place every time and I need a pencil, I can still be looking you in the eye and giving instructions while I'm grabbing my pencil to mark it down. Then after the pencils, I've got a cup where I keep my generic paper clips, rubber bands, clothespins to use as bow limiters. Wedged between my McAdams and that are my detention forms and my instrument maintenance forms. The detention forms are like the actual carbon copy ones from school. And the instrument maintenance forms are just, hey, you grew, you need a 3/4 size, or hey, your bow really needs a rehair, just little reminders for their parents. Mm-hmm. Then I've got my daily grade binder on the same little cart, and that I can just open up to the page right there. Mm-hmm.
I need to get better with that, honestly. I mean, the number of times I get on a podium, I'm like, I need a pencil, or I need a Post-it, or just anything like that.
Oh yeah, and I keep the little Post-its in the paperclip bowl.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I always use the itty bitty ones because you can put more of them on your page before you run out of room.
Yep.
You laugh, but I think about those things when I get my supplies ready.
So you talked a lot about how you handle daily grades. What about major grades? How are those different?
Major grades are reserved for concert preparation and performance and solo and ensemble preparation and performance. You'll notice that I titled it Concert Preparation and Performance. It's in my experience, I found it's difficult to justify to your administration or your parents putting a kid's grade on their after-school concert that they might not have a ride to on time. Like, oh, my kid got a 50, but my car broke down and I don't have enough money in my savings account to fix it. Why are you penalizing my kid for this? I break down my rubric for major grades so that the vast majority of their points are earned in class and at their immediate after-school rehearsals. So we'll have 5 to 10, depending on which concert it is. Points of their grade is, did they take their information letter home, get it signed within a week, and return it? And I'm lenient about who signs it if their parents are out of town on business or if it's not their parents who are taking care of them right now. I say whatever adult at home helps you take care of school right now is allowed to sign your concert letter for me. So that's the first part of their grade, and it's only 5 to 10 of their grade. Then I'll have a chunk dedicated to in-class preparation, and that's between 20 to 30 points of their grade, maybe even up to 40. It's been a while since I looked at my concert grading since it's July. And there will be days, and this is in about the week leading up to the concert, where I'll call out, okay, what we're playing right now in class, this is going towards your concert major grade. So that bow lift we talked about, or getting to your fingerboard for that piano like we talked about, looking at me for the fermata like we talked about, and I will make sure to announce it to the kids that this part is going to their concert grade, not their daily book grade. I'm careful to make sure that I don't double dip in the daily grade book and the major grade. Then the other section will be for rehearsals, and I usually only do one rehearsal per concert with each group, because I don't want to be there that many days extra a week, and I don't want to ask more of my kids than I'm asking of myself getting ready for a concert. And similarly, we will grade them on how well they did. Like, were you miscounting your dotted half note again? I'll call out this next time through, it's going on your rehearsal grade. And that will be between 20 to 30 points of their grade. And then whatever is left over is for the concert itself. So you can have a day where you didn't plan your ride on time and just totally skipped the concert, and you can still pass your concert grade. Not very well, but kind of like I said earlier about poor Johnny who didn't do well on his theory work that day. It holds him accountable on his grade and it reflects it, but it doesn't absolutely tank that kid if they weren't able to make it.
So now, if they show up, do they just get all those points, like to the concert, do they get all those points, or do you have anything broken down of like uniform requirement or, you know, how they handle being an audience member?
I'm kind of glad you brought up those questions. I do have a uniform requirement in my handbook, but I also understand that being at a fully Title I school, some kids are only going to approximate the uniform. Don't let the kids know this, but as long as you generally blend in, I'm not gonna do anything to your grade for that, because I understand about having to purchase specific clothes. So if a kid shows up in black joggers, black sneakers, and a long sleeve white t-shirt, they're gonna blend in, and I'm not gonna be upset with them for that. They're doing their best with what they have, and they're there performing at their best. So I'm not gonna take points off for that. Audience etiquette is 100% gradable, and all of my kids are expected to be at the full concert all the way through and to behave appropriately. And we'll coach them on that in class. I think it's unfair to just suddenly show up at a performance and say, okay, kids, now behave. You actually need to tell them, you can react to the music. You can elbow your neighbor and point and go, ooh, but then you're not going to talk beyond that. Like, music is meant to be reacted to. I try to coach them in ways that you can react and be engaged with the music without being disruptive. And we'll work on that in the week leading up to a concert as well, so that they feel free to express themselves, but then are also aware of their surroundings and what they're expected to do.
Mm-hmm. What's your makeup policy if they miss a concert?
I don't have one.
Yeah.
In our handbook at the beginning of the year, I clearly write out our attendance policy, and this is one of the things that I have checked in with my principal about to make sure that we are in agreement, so that if I get a family who's unhappy with it, he is aware of how I feel and he's going to support me on it, which is great. So at the beginning of the year, the attendance policy says major grade concerts are part of this curriculum, and it's helpful that it's written into our course descriptions for the district that after school concerts are required. So we have that in our corner to help with that. I say if you have a previous conflict, and this is like what in the first week of August, if I say, hey, you're leaving for all of Thanksgiving to go visit your family in Mexico for a month, and you already purchased your plane tickets, that's fine. You purchased your plane tickets before you ever knew about your concert that you'd be missing that week. Mm-hmm. You were excused. Or, oh, you're on this cool club volleyball, and your major tournament for the whole year is on the same day as Solo and Ensemble Festival, and you've already paid your dues for club volleyball. That's okay. Go do club volleyball. You knew about it before this concert. But when you get the calendar in your hand and you've signed off on the calendar, then you're kind of acknowledging these are my school dates for the year.
Yeah.
And then, of course, illness with a doctor's note, or if they're coded in our school absence system with like the excused absence, they don't need a doctor's note for me if they're already coded in the school attendance taker as absent. So illness is excused, family emergency with a parent note is excused, and generally I don't have them do anything bonus for me, because those are just, I mean, if it's a kid who, like the traveling family who was going out of town before, I'll have them like perform their concert for me personally before they go out of town. But for last minute illness or last minute emergency, my kind of idea is that kid or that family is already dealing with something major. I don't need to add on to that for something that I have already graded like 80% of their grade prior to that concert date.
Sure.
So they'll kind of just get a free pass on
on
that portion of the rubric.
Yeah. Do you find yourself coming into the conflict where the kids have another activity that same night, basketball game?
I do a lot of legwork beforehand to put my events on days that have no athletic conflicts. And so do the other music teachers in our department at our school. We have a very close relationship with our athletics director, and he's usually able to get us the athletics schedules before the general district emails them out to us. Mm-hmm. And we'll kind of, between the band, the orchestra, and the choir, and the theater, because our stage is all in the gym, so all of us together are figuring out when we can use the stage. We start by eliminating all of the days that have athletics conflicts, because that's a schedule that's made higher than the campus level. There's nothing to be changed about that. And then on the dates that remain, we'll kind of parcel them out between the other performing groups. So maybe one event out of the year necessarily has to be placed on a conflict date, but otherwise I absolutely put my concerts and rehearsals on days that don't have school conflicts, so I just don't have to deal with that.
And then the kids don't have to deal with it either.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to do me a favor, the kids a favor, the basketball team a favor. We just don't want to have conflicts because they're just no fun to work out.
So how do you handle playing tests?
I do all of them live in class for two main reasons. Number one, I don't have enough out of class time to grade recordings. Number two, it's important that kids learn how to play in front of each other, and this gives them that opportunity on a regular basis. I lied, there are three reasons. Number three, I care so much about their physical setup and their placement and their posture that on a video, even if you ask the kids to put their hands in a video recording, you're not going to see all the aspects that you need to versus a live test. So those are the main three reasons I like to do them live in class. Now, if a kid has extreme anxiety and is going to have a problem performing in class, if they come to me and say, can I take mine in tutorials? I will tell them, for your grade, we'll play in tutorials, just the two of us. When it comes around to test day, you're still going to play. Mm-hmm. I'm still going to write on the form, but I won't be grading you anymore. This way no one has to know, and you're not nervous because you already took your grade. And usually after just one round of that, the kid goes, oh, I did better in class. I'm just going to play it in class. And it kind of helps them, give them that step to be a little more confident in playing their test. I use the same rubric every time. So the top half of the page is broken down into a notes and intonation column, a posture column, a bowing column, a tone column. And since it's July and I haven't looked at one of these in a while, I know I'm missing one, but they're all your different aspects of playing that you care about when you're listening to a kid. And up in that rubric, it will have some common things already written out, like cricket at frog, cricket at tip, bow thumb, all the different fingers and joints are written down. So as I'm grading, I can just circle it. I don't have to take all the time to write every single one, because if you're grading live, you don't want to kill a bunch of time writing when the next kid could be performing. So that's the top half of the sheet. On the bottom half of the sheet, I cut and paste the excerpt from the piece they're going to be playing. We do one playing test on each concert piece that they'll be playing. And down at on the music, I will mark intonation, arrows up and arrows down. If they miscounted a rhythm, I will circle that rhythm and write the correct number of beats. If they played a wrong pitch, I will circle the note and write the correct pitch. As I'm grading, whether it's the top rubric for posture and that kind of stuff, or whether it's down on the paper, I always write the correction, not the error. Because if a kid is going to go back and look at this, 'cause my goal is that the kid sees the feedback and tries to improve on the next time. I don't want them to accidentally misinterpret half note 3 beats as, oh, I should put 3 beats in this half note. I want them to see that feedback and see half note 2 beats, yes, and to internalize that correction. I always mark the right thing, not the wrong thing as I'm grading. It seems so trivial, but in terms of just like your mindset as you're thinking and teaching, I think it's important to distinguish. And that always with a metronome also. I am Mrs. Metronome. We use it all the time. So while that one kid is performing, everyone else in the group will be doing a written exercise that is related to a topic from our method book or something that we've been working on in class. And I keep all of my written work, so if I need to, I can just pull out the same one from last year and I don't have to spend all that time rewriting something new. It's just already ready for me. And I like that written work because it keeps the kid's attention off of the performer. Nothing is more awkward than having your frenemy across the room staring at you as you're trying to play a live performance. So everyone's attention when they're not playing is on the paper. But it's not busy work paper either. It's legit music theory or educationally real and relevant material that we're working on, which I can then use to gauge where are deficiencies. Where do we need to spend some more time learning that this kid missed out on a concept or something? So it is kind of a bummer because I do have to grade those, but they grade quite a bit faster than a recorded playing test might be.
Okay, so like different direction. Pedagogy-wise.
Quit talking to me about my favorite things.
Obviously, we all focus on all aspects so that we have a well-rounded string player. But do you have any like technical focus specialty that you feel like is your thing that you really like to work on most?
All right, Kevin, what school do I teach at?
You teach at Bowman Middle School.
I teach the bow, man. Matt's over there groaning.
I was waiting for it.
Because if you really get down to it and you're watching a good performer play, which of their hands is making them sound the best? It's the right hand all the time. And there are so many muscles that need to work together and so many different variables in your bow hand that I feel like if you don't develop the finesse and the ability to play at different parts of the bow and to vary your bow speed while you are a young player, you kind of get frozen, and it's a very difficult task to overcome as you're an older player. And like, this is not to say the left hand is not important. It is so important. You guys, out of tune notes sounds terrible. But there's less, at the risk of making another bad pun, there's less dynamic aspect to your left hand than there is to your right. It's like you get your good basic setup in your left hand and you're kind of good. But I just feel like there's so much to be done with the bow that if you don't get a kid used to it at the beginning, it's going to be harder to get them to that next level of playing without a lot of difficult conscious remediation. So from the very beginning, and this is another wonderful tactic I stole from Sue when I worked with her, is before you even make sounds with the bow, we practice setting it on the string at the frog, or actually we start at the middle where everything's kind of a nice square and neutral and even. Then we'll move to the frog, and we have to notice how our wrist changes, how our fingers change to keep the bow, I call it perfect T-cross, because of course you want to use the word perpendicular, but when you're moving that fast, the kids will get confused with perfect T-cross. Then we'll go back to the middle, and this is all picking it up and placing it down without making sound. Then we'll go all the way out to the tip, and I'll usually, do that broken chicken wing thing where I just pull it behind me and the kids laugh and like, Miss Farrar, your bow is so crooked. I'm like, well, help me fix it. What do I need to move to get it back in place? Oh, I need to push forward. I need to open up my elbow. And we'll do that routine for like at least a week, maybe 2, before we even make sounds on the bow. Because just before they even use the bow, they need to realize how many different considerations need to be done at different places of the bow. And when we start making sounds, we'll do them at those parts of the bow. We'll get to the middle, okay, open and close your elbow. And I think it's important to direct them on which joints to use. Because if you don't tell them to open and close their elbow, they're just going to move back and forth generally. And then you have that thing where they're locked up and you're having to remediate which muscles actually do the movement. And then we'll do 2 inches at the frog, and we'll do 2 inches at the tip, and we'll do that on different strings so they can practice opening and closing their armpit. I also like to direct them to their armpits. Kids respond a lot about their armpits because, oh my God, we're all embarrassed about deodorant and puberty in middle school. So it's just a great attention grabber. And also if you say raise your elbow, they have really interesting ways of doing that, but is that really the part of you that you meant to open and close? So just to be really specific about which part of your body you need to be moving. And it's always really helpful for me to go around and touch gently. If the kid is isolating the wrong joint, I'll hold their elbow and say, leave your elbow point there. Now move this part of you or whatever, to kind of give them that reinforcement of, oh yeah, those muscles over there, you have them. Those are the ones that need to move. Because it's really hard to move those fine points of your body.
So that's like when you're getting them started on the bow, like for the more advanced kids, like how, if you've got a new piece of music you're starting, how much of the focus is on the bow, do you think, at the beginning of the piece when you're first starting it?
I don't know if I actively think about that when I'm starting, but definitely one of the first things I will remediate if we stop to go back on something will be tone or articulation or style is one of the first things I will adjust when I'm rehearsing with kids. Because I think those are the hardest things to get correct, and you want to spend most of your time working on the hardest things. Because intonation, I feel like we work on all the time, and if you've got a good left hand shape, and so many of the kids in our district already have really well developed ears because we have a great elementary code eye system in Plano, that often happens without as much effort. So if I spend 3 whole rehearsals at the beginning going, nope, higher, nope, higher, nope, higher, we've kind of fixed something that would have fixed itself quicker later on down the road and missed 3 days of good style work or something, or good tone production. A lot of when I do that tone production work, especially with the older kids, is, hey, I necessarily am at the tip of my bow here because I just finished a really long note. What do I need to do to overcome the fact that I'm necessarily stuck at the tip? And kind of get the kids thinking about how to solve that conundrum or that puzzle. Or I am necessarily at the frog and need to be quiet. How do I work on that? It's all a bunch of problem solving.
So when I think throughout the year of events and things the kids can participate in that kind of, I don't want to say disrupt, but kind of really shake the normal flow of the daily rehearsal. More than anything, I think of solo and ensemble. It's like you're trying to get a bunch of kids to participate, and how do you get them ready without spending a ton of time outside of school? How do you handle solo and ensemble contests when it comes to curriculum and participation?
I'm going to backtrack just a little before we answer that question, because
Sure.
Some of the daily expectations and like daily rehearsal procedures, I haven't really talked about how we learn something new. And this happens more often in our method book exercises and in certain passages from pieces, but more in our method book exercises. I have this kind of progression of preparation exercises that I stick to. And I kind of like to think of them in traditional harmonic analysis as like your predominant chords. You can use as many of them as you want, or you can use as few of them as you want, but you always need to go in the same order or it doesn't quite work. So at the very beginning level is clap and count, where we say the beat numbers, yes, even in the rests, because even though rests are silent, the beat never stops. So we keep counting during rests. And then we will clap the rhythm. And that's your base level, is are the kids reading horizontally and in time. Then the next level up from clap and count, we will add what I call read and finger. So we will say the letter names in time while putting our fingers on the strings. And that kind of tests for, is the kid not only visually tracking horizontally, but are they translating to the correct location on their instrument? Every once in a while, I'll run into a group that needs a little in-between step in there, where they're reading on time horizontally, but they're not reading vertically very well on their lines and spaces. So we will actually touch the notes on their page while they go down and say the letters, and that kind of helps get the line and space literacy caught up. So clap and count, if you need to, touch and say, and then read and finger. After reading and fingering, the next level up is shadow bowing, and the way that I like to shadow bow at school is violins, violas in the crook of your elbow, cellos in your lap, basses just with a pretend bow in front of you. And I will always have the kids say something as we shadow bow, and I'll kind of dictate what to say depending on what the music needs. For example, if there's a strange slur pattern in there, we will probably say our downs and our ups. Or if the rhythm is very asymmetrical and we're needing to make sure we stay at the tip or stay at the frog or recover correctly, we might say our bow placements or our bow speeds. For example, one of my favorite beginner pieces to teach is War Dance, because it mixes whole notes, half notes, and quarter notes, only using opens and first fingers. So you really get a chance to work on your bow. So we'd say, or the music goes D, D, E, D, 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 E, D. But for our shadow bow, we'll go whole bow, tip, tip, whole bow, frog, 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 whole bow. It's just whatever concept I want the kids to be thinking about in their heads while they're shadowing is what we'll say out loud. Sometimes we'll keep saying the beats while we shadow out loud. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we'll say the letters, just whichever concept is giving them the most trouble. So there's lots of different options for shadow bow. And then, of course, the very next one would be actually putting the bow on the string. And no matter what group I'm teaching, no matter what piece I'm teaching, that's the order that I teach it in. But kind of like I said earlier, I don't do all of the steps all the time, but I never do them out of order because each one kind of checks for what level of where the problem is coming from. Is it a reading problem? Is it a transferring your finger problem? Is it a bow direction problem? And each level kind of helps you diagnose where the actual issue is coming from with the kiddos. So back to the solo and ensemble question, because that's their day-to-day experience. And sometimes I wonder, is that too predictable? Is that too dry? Because sometimes I do wonder if I'm just a little too straightforward and not as goofy as I can be. But then I realize I told dad jokes all the time, so I feel a little better about it. But I wonder if it's like really connecting with the kids on that structural level. And then we'll get to March and April when it's time to get ready for the Solo and Ensemble Festival. I require all of our 7th and 8th graders to participate. If you're in private lessons, you'll play a solo that you prepare with your private lessons teacher. Everyone else, or soloists if you want to double up, will do an ensemble with your peers, and that's what I will coach you in. So I will pre-select a couple of duets, a couple of trios, and a couple of quartets that are appropriate for their level, and this is kind of where you control the environment and the kids make the decision. So I will pre-select the songs, and then the kids get to pick which one they like best. They also get to pick their friends that they work with, and I coach them. Make sure it's someone you want to spend time with. Make sure it's someone you think you're on the same level of performance with. And most times the kids really do select really well for who they're going to work with. It's awesome. So then they'll break up into their groups, and it's kind of a cacophony at first because I don't want to send them off to the practice rooms before they're ready. So we'll all stay in the orchestra room, but all in different corners of the room. And to watch them take each other through clap and count, read and finger, shadow bow, then play is just the most wonderful, adorable, and heartwarming thing, that they're really taking it to heart. And I tell them, like, I'm not going to be able to teach you everything because there are so many different groups playing so many different pieces. You're going to do this yourselves. And to watch them take those skills and really apply them, I'm going to start crying because kids are just the best. It's one of my favorite times of the year, to watch all of that come together and have the kids figure it out with each other. And of course, I'll make it around and double check, like, okay, kids, I've got 5 minutes with you before I need to go across the room. Where are you having trouble? Or what part have you just gotten good at that you want to show off to me? And I'll, of course, be able to kind of redirect them if they missed something. But yeah, solo and ensemble is one of my favorite times of the year. After we've made it through that initial music selection time, there's usually about 3 more weeks before they actually have to do the performance, and we'll spend 2 or 3 days a week broken up into ensemble time, and they'll get the whole class period to do their independent rehearsals. And once they've gotten it a little better, the groups that I trust the most can go down the hallway into the practice room to work. And then the other 2 days a week will be normal rehearsal, because we still have another concert not too long after that one that we need to get going for. So it's not free time all the time, every time. It's like we're coming back on Tuesdays and Thursdays to do instrument to the left, tuning procedure around the room, time to do the rehearsal and our stuff together. So they're kind of still staying with me in our normal routine, even though it is a little odd to break up and have all that independent time. But since they've had 1.5 years of operating in this structured rehearsal environment, they maintain it for themselves pretty well when they're given the chance.
You know, I haven't really thought about this before, but like, you know, you'll have me do like a little arrangement or something like that, or write a piece sometimes for your kids. And sometimes I'm like, when is my final deadline? When do I need to have this to you? And you're like, I have to have it by this day. And I'm like, that's only 3.5 weeks before this concert. And then I'll show up and maybe like play drums on one of them or something like that.
And the kids love that so much.
And they just like, they have it down better than any group I've taught in like twice that time. And I think it's just I've never, because I've heard you talk about how you prepare them before, and I've seen what they do, but I never really put together like they're teaching themselves. They must be teaching themselves so much of that music, because those middle school classes are, how long are yours? 45 minutes?
45.
And that includes
uncase, get tuned, go through announcements.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I almost never teach something by rote or call and response. And this is another way that Bowman sometimes, quote, moves a little slower, that I will take the time to sit there and say, how many beats are in this note? And I'll just sit there with crickets until kids answer. Like the answer is coming from the kids. Unless it's the first week that I've ever introduced a topic to you, the answer is coming from you, the class, before we move on. So they just get used to analyzing what they're seeing, analyzing what they're feeling. If they're not ready to give me an answer of, oh, where should I be in the bow? Or who had that cool part? Or who do I need to listen for? If they don't immediately have that answer, we'll just play it again with that cue of, hey, this is your job. Figure out the answer to this question the next time we play. So I really do my best to kind of develop independent listening and thinking in the kids, even if we might not play as hard of music as everyone else does or that kind of stuff. I like to think, and hopefully it's true, that my kids really learn how to rehearse and they learn how to learn with me, I think is kind of what I feel more strongly about than playing the hardest, coolest thing. Yeah, so sometimes in those instances where you come and play with them, I haven't given it to them. They've had to do it themselves, so they feel a little more confident on it because I just kind of made them do it themselves.
So you had mentioned earlier about problem identification, I think is what you called it, and you said you wanted to elaborate on that, I think. Is there anything you wanted to add to that idea?
Yeah, at least for me at the middle school level, I feel like so many of the problems that kids run into with performances or rehearsals have to do with physical space, or physical setup, or the physical layout of the music on their on the page. So the first place that I go to solve a problem is to look at a kid's setup or to look at the music. What is confusing about this part? I think sometimes as educators, we don't give kids enough credit for the understanding. Like if they're having trouble performing this passage with a bunch of dotted eighths and quarters, we're like, oh, well, that's a hard rhythm. The kids don't understand the rhythm. But if you go back through the, quote, predominant chords scaffolding, you'll find out they can clap and count it perfectly. So the problem is not in their understanding of the beats and how they line up. Something else is in the way. And for me, 9 times out of 10, it's bow placement and bow speed. They are probably, they know that they don't want to leave their balance point. That's the sweet spot. So they're not going down bow enough because they're afraid of leaving it. So they're cheating out that dot, not because they don't understand the dot, but they're trying not to leave the balance point. So they're rushing on it and getting to the 8th note too fast because of the distance is wrong. So they need more help finessing slow and heavy versus fast and light to get back, rather than 1 and 2 and that kind of stuff. Or a lot of times with intonation, we might not give our kids enough credit to understand what the pitch is supposed to sound like. And perhaps we need to be looking, is their first finger, like violins and violas, is it coming down too diagonal and pushing really, really sharp? Because even though it looks like it's on the tape or it looks like it's where you want it to be, it's actually about 4 millimeters sharp because they're coming down at the wrong angle. So it's less that they didn't understand what a B is supposed to sound like and more their hand wasn't ready to play it in the right place. Or lots of stuff with bows, like kids, oh, they're stuck at the tip because they're lazy, violins and violas. What if they're stuck at the tip because they're crooked at the frog and don't like the way it sounds? So they're being conscious as a good player of, I don't want to sound scratchy. And they found the point of the bow that they're not scratchy in. And instead of, oh, come on, you lazies, get out of the lazy tip, we actually need to just remediate their tone quality at the frog. And yeah, I think there's just so much of problem solving at this beginning level of music that is physical rather than mental. Because kids are smart. They learn things really well. And muscles are not smart. We say this a lot in class. You, Kevin, you, Matt, are real smart. You got good brains. Your poor fingers do not have brains of their own, and we need to help them out. And I think that's so much of teaching at the middle school level is getting the body in the right place. Because the brain either understands it now or will understand it very soon. And just retraining the physicality is a little more difficult. So just always looking at a kid's setup and shape and mechanics alongside listening to what you're hearing, I think is what really helps me be a better teacher.
You've been teaching for how long?
I think I'm about to start my 8th year now.
8th year.
I know, it's that weird stage where I'm not a beginning teacher anymore, but I'm not nearly as experienced as some of our other mentors in the field who are great. So it's like I have all these ideas that I think are worthwhile. I'm like, are they that worthwhile?
I'm sure they are. I really appreciate how meticulous you are about all these components. How has it been from year one to where you are now in terms of your own development to get to that point?
I've cut a lot of, is the phrase cutting the fat out?
Trimming the
fat, yeah. Because a lot of these systems that I use have been in place since year one, because Sue was so good at organization and running a program with all things considered in the decisions that she made. So I had a lot of these systems in place then. And as I've grown and been out on my own, because for, 4 years at Bowman, I taught all by myself, just kind of more of the why. When I was a first and second year teacher doing these systems, it was kind of like, well, this is how it works. It's a good system. I don't want to mess it up. And then when I got out on my own, I took so many of those same things. But then I started to ask myself, well, why do I do it this way? And it would either help me refine it to personalize to my specific teaching style, or maybe there's a different way. That way is great, but maybe it's outdated for how I'm teaching right now. But being meticulous helps keep me together. Because all of us as teachers have days where we are mentally or physically or emotionally real bad. We are not ready to be our best on those days. And the kids are still there and the kids still need us. And having a system to fall back on, it can run itself for a day or two without the kids being affected at all by me being exhausted or me being anxious or me being sick or me being stressed out. The system holds me together when I need it to. And it works the other way too. On any given day, one or all of your students are going to be having a terrible day where they just failed a test, their best friend just bullied the crud out of them on social media, and something terrible is happening in their family, like from all levels of trivial to serious issues the kids are going through. Having the system gives them a place where they know exactly what to expect every day. On days when they are not ready to be their most successful, the system kind of boosts them into a place of success, which can help them make it through the school day, or at least through your class while still learning when they're not their best on that day.
We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Rebecca Farrar.
The educational work featured at the end of this episode is The Lowdown by my husband, Kevin Sluter. Listed as a grade 1, you can find it at grandmesamusic.com.
If you have any questions or suggestions for the show, shoot us an email at rightofstring@gmail.com.
Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts and join us for our next episode.
See you next time. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.